You'll never make it without a man to take care of you. My father's words hit me like a slap across the face when I was 16 years old. I was standing in our cramped kitchen in Portland, telling him about my business idea, my voice full of hope and excitement. My two older brothers, Marcus and Tyler, erupted into laughter like I'd told the funniest joke they'd ever heard. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his grease-stained shirt, that familiar look of disappointment carved into his weathered face. He shook his head slowly, deliberately, making sure I understood he wasn't joking. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat on my bedroom floor and wrote down every goal I could think of in a spiral notebook. I didn't cry. I promised myself I'd make him eat every single one of those words. What I didn't know then was that my revenge would take 17 years to arrive, and it would come in a form neither of us could have predicted. His life would eventually depend entirely on the daughter he'd just destroyed. Just before you continue to watch, Feminine Revenge would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage us to keep this streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. The house always smelled the same: motor oil, cheap beer, and the weight of disappointment. It was a Tuesday night when Dad found my college acceptance letter on the kitchen counter. I'd been accepted to Portland State University with a partial scholarship. I was so proud, so hopeful. "You think you're better than me now?" he yelled, snatching the letter from my hands. His face turned red, veins bulging in his neck the way they always did when he drank. Before I could respond, he crumpled my acceptance letter and threw it into the sink, turning on the faucet. I watched the water soak through the paper, the ink bleeding into nothing. Something inside me snapped. I reached into the sink, grabbed that soggy piece of paper, and looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, Dad. I do think I'm better than this." That was the last night I ever slept in that house. I packed one bag and left before sunrise. College wasn't the glamorous fresh start I'd imagined. My friend Yolanda let me crash on her couch in her tiny studio apartment near campus. I worked at a coffee shop during the day and cleaned offices at night, surviving on ramen noodles and dollar store bread. Every morning at 5, I'd wake up to study before my shift started. The couch springs dug into my back, and I could hear Yolanda's boyfriend arguing with her through the thin walls. But every single night when I closed my eyes, I'd hear Dad's voice. "You'll never make it." That voice became my alarm clock, my motivation, my fuel. When professors asked what drove me to work so hard, I'd smile politely and say, "Family values." If only they knew the truth. I wasn't running toward success. I was running away from shame. What I didn't realize yet was that you can never truly escape the voices that shaped you. After graduation, I sent out 12 job applications to consulting firms across Portland. I had a business degree, good grades, and genuine passion. I got 12 rejection emails. Each one felt like my father laughing in my ear, proving he'd been right all along. But quitting wasn't an option for me anymore. I started freelancing, offering to help small businesses manage their books for free just to build experience and references. I worked out of coffee shops with spotty Wi-Fi, surviving on refills and dreams. One bakery owner, Mrs. Kowalski, was so impressed with my work that she paid me $200 and recommended me to 3 other shops. By the end of that first year, I had 5 paying clients and something I'd never felt before: hope. That small check became the first crack in the wall Dad had built around my confidence. I framed it and hung it above my desk as a reminder that I was building something real. The day I made my first $500 from consulting, I took myself out to a real dinner. Not fast food, not ramen, but an actual restaurant with tablecloths and everything. The waiter noticed I was alone and asked if I was celebrating something special. I smiled and said, "Yes. Freedom." He didn't understand, but I did. That night, I created a website for my services and posted it everywhere I could online. Within 3 months, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with potential clients. I had to turn people away because I couldn't keep up with demand. I hired my first employee, a recent graduate named Brianna, who reminded me of myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something real and lasting. I was proving that those words he spoke weren't prophecy, They were just poison. But the universe wasn't done testing me yet. The next call I received wasn't from a client. After 5 years of complete silence, my brother Marcus called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was different, quieter, less cocky than I remembered. He said Dad had lost his job at the auto shop and wasn't doing well, whatever that meant. I felt absolutely nothing at first, just this cold, hollow space where emotion should have been. Marcus asked if I could, maybe help out with some things, but wouldn't elaborate on what things meant. I told him I'd think about it and call him back, but deep down I already knew I wouldn't rush to Dad's rescue. He'd made it clear I was worthless, so why would worthless me be any help now? But something in Marcus's tone made me uneasy, something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the usual Brooks family pride, it was something closer to fear. That phone call planted a seed I tried desperately to ignore. Still, curiosity and old wounds have a way of pulling you back. 3 weeks later, I finally drove to the old neighborhood. The house looked smaller and sadder than I remembered, like it had aged in dog years. I knocked, and Marcus opened the door with a look of relief that made me uncomfortable. Inside, the man who once commanded every room with his booming voice now sat hunched in a stained recliner, hands trembling slightly. Dad's workshop in the garage was completely empty, all his precious tools gone, probably pawned for rent money. When he looked up at me, his eyes were dim and watery, and he whispered, "You look successful." I wanted to scream. "You told me I never would be." I wanted to throw his words back in his face and watch him choke on them. But instead, I just smiled tightly and said, "I'm doing okay." Standing there, I didn't know whether to pity this broken man or make him face everything he'd created. The answer would come sooner than I expected. Dad asked if I was still playing around with that computer business stuff like it was a hobby I'd outgrow. I told him calmly that I was running my own consulting firm with 8 employees and 43 active clients. He scoffed and shook his head. "You got lucky. Real work is done with your hands, not pushing papers around." Some things never change, no matter how much evidence sits in front of them. Marcus shot me an apologetic look from across the room, but I didn't need his pity. I'd spent years waiting for Dad to acknowledge my success, to admit he was wrong, to say he was proud. But I realized sitting in that depressing living room that his approval didn't matter anymore. I had changed, grown, and built something real. He was still stuck in the same bitter mindset that had kept him small his entire life. I wasn't going to argue with him this time. I was going to win so quietly he wouldn't even hear it coming. Exactly 1 month later, Marcus called me in a panic at 7 in the morning. Dad had collapsed in the grocery store, his heart giving out while he was buying milk. When I arrived at the hospital, a nurse was asking Marcus who would be responsible for the medical bills. Marcus looked at me with desperate eyes, and suddenly everyone in that waiting room was staring at me expectantly. The financial counselor appeared with a clipboard and asked if I was family. I said yes. She asked if I could handle the costs of his care, the surgery, the recovery, all of it. In that moment, I felt 2 things simultaneously: pity for the broken man in the hospital bed and power over the situation I'd never had before. I thought about walking away, about letting him face the consequences of a lifetime of poor choices. But I didn't. Instead, I asked for the paperwork. This wasn't forgiveness. This was the beginning of control. The nurse placed financial responsibility forms on the clipboard in front of me. Dad was awake now, staring at the floor tiles, too proud to ask for help but knowing he had no other choice. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the hospital bed railing. I read through every line carefully, making him wait, making this moment last. Then I signed my name in blue ink at the bottom, Elena Brooks. As I wrote each letter, I thought bitterly, "So now I'm good enough to pay your way?" I handed the clipboard back to the nurse, without saying a word to him. Then I picked up my purse and walked out of that hospital room before he could say thank you, before he could make some comment that would ruin this moment. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what I'd just done. I thought signing those papers would be the end of it, that I'd paid my debt to biology and could move on. I was so wrong. A week later, I went back to Dad's house to pick up some documents the hospital needed. Marcus was at work, so I was alone, surrounded by decades of memories I'd tried to forget. In the hallway closet, I found a shoebox stuffed with old photographs, most of them faded and curled at the edges. There were pictures of Mom before she left, pictures of my brothers as kids, and then I found several photos of me. One showed me at my 8th grade graduation, smiling with my certificate. On the back, in Dad's messy handwriting, it said, Elena, June 2004. Stubborn like her old man. I sat on the floor holding that photo, something cracking open inside my chest. Maybe he had cared in his own broken way. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it without his fists or his words. But the wounds were too deep for one old photograph to heal. I put it back in the box, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 weeks after the surgery, Dad called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was weak and raspy. I should have told you I was proud of you, he said, and I literally froze in the middle of my office. Those words had never existed in his vocabulary, in his world. For a moment, I thought maybe this was it, the apology I'd waited 17 years to hear. But before I could respond, he added, Still, you always did think you were better than everyone else in this family. And just like that, the wall went back up. The moment shattered like glass. I realized then with absolute clarity that he would never truly change, that his pride was a disease he'd never recover from. But here's what he didn't understand. I didn't need him to change anymore. I could change the rules of this game entirely. And I was about to do exactly that. Starting immediately. I made a calculated decision that night. I could walk away and let him struggle, or I could control the situation completely on my terms. So I created a plan, quietly and carefully. I hired a private nurse to check on him 3 times a week. I paid his rent directly to the landlord. I set up grocery deliveries and managed all his medications through my company's health account. But here's the key detail. I did all of this anonymously through a community assistance program I funded myself. Dad thought the county government and some church charity were helping him out. He had absolutely no idea that his worthless daughter was his secret lifeline, that every meal, every pill, every visit was paid for by the girl he said would never make it without a man. Marcus knew the truth, but I swore him to secrecy. For the first time in my life, I held all the power, and Dad was completely in the dark. Secrets have a way of surfacing eventually, especially expensive ones. I just didn't know how soon. For 6 months, I maintained this secret control over Dad's life. Every bill that got paid, every service he received, was a silent statement he couldn't read. He used to hold power over me through his words, through his disappointment and cruelty. Now I held power through silence and money, through being the invisible hand keeping him alive. I wasn't sure if this made me generous or cruel, a good daughter or a calculating monster. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I was becoming just like him, using power to hurt someone weaker. But then I'd remember 16-year-old me standing in that kitchen, and I'd feel justified all over again. This was accountability, not revenge. This was teaching him what it felt like to depend on someone you destroyed. The moral ambiguity didn't bother me as much as it probably should have. But secrets are fragile things, and one careless sentence was about to blow my cover entirely. It happened on a Thursday evening. Dad's nurse, Patricia, was helping him with his medication when she accidentally said, "Your daughter Elena is so thoughtful to arrange all this for you." I got the furious phone call 30 minutes later. "I don't need your damn charity," he shouted into the phone, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I stayed calm and said softly, "It's not charity, Dad. It's accountability." There was silence on the other end. Then he said something I couldn't quite hear and hung up abruptly. I sat there holding my phone, knowing the fragile peace we'd built was completely shattered. Marcus called me an hour later saying Dad was furious, ranting about pride and independence and ungrateful children. I told Marcus to let him be angry. That anger meant he still had fight in him. But I knew the real war had just begun, and Dad's next move would remind me exactly how dangerous wounded pride could be. 1 week of silence passed. Then I received a handwritten letter in the mail, my name and address written in Dad's shaky handwriting. I opened it standing by my mailbox, and it wasn't an apology like I'd half hoped. It was a challenge. He wrote, "If you really want to help me, come fix my house instead of hiding behind your money like some coward. Prove you're not just buying your way out of guilt." I read it 3 times, anger building with each pass. So paying for his survival wasn't enough? Now I had to prove myself physically too? Fine. I drove to his house the very next day, not to fix anything, but to confront the man who had spent my entire life building my scars and insecurities. I needed to face him directly, no more hiding behind anonymous payments and third-party arrangements. But when I arrived, what I found waiting changed absolutely everything between us. The front door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the breeze. The house was empty. I pushed the door open slowly, calling out for Dad, but only silence answered me back. The living room was unusually clean, organized in a way it never had been when I was growing up. On the kitchen table sat another note in his handwriting. "I'm at the old workshop. Come find me if you actually care." My heart dropped into my stomach. The workshop had burned down 6 years ago in an electrical fire. There was nothing left there except concrete foundation and ash and painful memories. I knew exactly what he was trying to do, what dark place his mind had gone. I ran back to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. The drive to the old workshop lot took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. I prayed I wasn't too late, prayed that his pride hadn't finally pushed him over an edge I couldn't pull him back from. When I pulled up to the ruins, I saw his truck parked crookedly on the gravel. My worst fears were about to be confirmed. I found him sitting on the concrete steps where the workshop entrance used to be, surrounded by charred wood and memories. He was crying, actually crying, tears running down his weathered face, shoulders shaking. "I thought I could rebuild it," he said without looking at me. "I thought I could fix something, anything. But I can't fix anything anymore. Not the shop, not my body, not the past." For the first time in my entire life, I didn't see the tyrant who had ruled our house with cruelty. I saw a man absolutely terrified of fading into nothing, of being forgotten, of dying without mattering. He looked up at me with red eyes and asked, "Do you hate me, Elena?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Only tears. We sat there in the ruins of his dreams, crying together for different reasons, but the same loss. And for the first time, I wondered if forgiveness might actually be the cruelest form of revenge. Because forgiving him meant letting go of the anger that had fueled me. I helped Dad stand up from those concrete steps, brushing ash and dirt off his jacket. "You can't fix the past," I told him quietly. "But you can help me build something new going forward." He nodded slowly, like he was processing words in a foreign language. That night, we sat at his kitchen table eating canned soup in heavy silence. Halfway through the meal, he set down his spoon and said, "You were right to leave that night. I was a bastard." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest thing to forgiveness I'd ever get from him. I said, "You were," and we left it at that. For 2 weeks, we maintained a careful truce, neither of us pushing too hard, both of us trying to figure out what this new relationship looked like. I thought maybe we'd found some kind of peace finally. But peace never lasts long in families built on years of pain. The next test was coming, and neither of us was prepared. A month after our conversation at the workshop ruins, I invited Dad to visit my office downtown. He resisted at first, claiming he didn't want to be shown off like some charity case. But I insisted, and Marcus drove him there on a Wednesday morning. When Dad walked into my office suite, he stopped in the doorway. Employees were working at clean desks, phones were ringing, clients were waiting in the modern lobby. Awards and certifications lined the walls. My name was on the door. Elena Brooks, founder and CEO. He walked through slowly, taking it all in with wide eyes. "This is all yours," he muttered. "You built all this?" I smiled, probably wider than I should have. Every single bit of it. He didn't speak for the rest of the visit, just watched me lead meetings and make decisions and run the company I'd built from nothing. I saw something in his silence that I'd never seen before. Pride. Real pride, not resentment. But pride is fragile, and time is even more unforgiving. Fate was about to remind both of us. 3 weeks later, I was in the middle of a client presentation when my phone started buzzing repeatedly. Marcus was calling over and over. I excused myself and answered. "Dad fell at home," Marcus said, his voice panicked. "He broke his hip. We're at the hospital." I drove 90 miles an hour to get there, nearly causing 2 accidents. When I arrived, Dad was unconscious, his face pale and sunken. The doctor explained he'd need surgery immediately and months of recovery afterward. I sat beside his hospital bed holding his cold hand, and I realized with absolute clarity how fragile time really was. All my plans for revenge, for making him suffer, for proving him wrong, suddenly felt so hollow and meaningless. What did any of it matter if he died before understanding what he'd done to me? When his eyes finally fluttered open hours after surgery and he saw me sitting there, something between us shifted permanently. The war was over. I'd won, but victory tasted like ash. I moved Dad into my house after he was released from the hospital. My guest room became his recovery room, filled with medical equipment and safety railings. Every morning, I woke up early to make his coffee exactly how he liked it, strong and black. I helped him walk slowly to the front porch where he could watch the sunrise. Something strange happened during those quiet mornings. He started telling stories, real stories, about Mom before she left, about his own father who'd been even crueler to him, about regrets that had piled up like unpaid debts. One morning while I was helping him with his physical therapy exercises, he said, "You became the person I prayed I'd be brave enough to raise." I had to walk away to the bathroom to hide my tears. After 33 years, that was the closest he'd ever come to saying he was proud. But his final confession was still coming, and it would rewrite everything I thought I understood. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Dad was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching rain fall on the street. Out of nowhere, he said, "I was so hard on you because I saw myself failing, and I couldn't stand watching you succeed where I didn't." The words hit me like lightning, burning and illuminating at the same time. Every time you talked about your dreams, I heard my own dreams mocking me. I wanted to crush yours before life did it for you, before you felt what I felt. Tears rolled down his weathered face. I was wrong. I was so damn wrong, Elena. I sat down on the floor beside his chair and said, "You didn't break me, Dad. You built me just the wrong way. You made me strong by trying to make me weak." He smiled weakly, painfully. "Then maybe I did one thing right in my miserable life." I held his hand, and we sat in silence. I didn't know those would be the last real words he'd ever say to me. Dad passed away quietly 3 weeks later on a Tuesday morning. There was no dramatic goodbye scene, no long emotional speech like in movies. Just his hand squeezing mine weakly and a whisper. "You made it, sweetheart. You really made it." Then his breathing slowed and stopped, and he was gone. The funeral was small. Marcus and Tyler were there, along with a few old friends from the auto shop. After everyone left, I sat alone in his old recliner that I'd moved to my house, surrounded by the smell of motor oil that still clung to the fabric. I realized my revenge had somehow transformed into redemption without me noticing. But his voice still echoed in every room, in every corner of my mind. And in that echo, I heard something I'd never expected to find. Peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of understanding. He'd been broken long before he'd tried to break me. That didn't excuse what he did, but it explained it. Today, I run a foundation called Daughters Rising for young women whose families doubted them or told them they'd never succeed. Every scholarship I give out is signed from a daughter who was told she'd never make it. Last month, we awarded 43 scholarships totaling $300,000. Sometimes I still visit Dad's grave and tell him about my latest wins, about employees I've promoted, about women I've helped. Not to gloat or prove anything anymore, but to remember how far I've traveled from that 16-year-old girl in the kitchen. Because the sweetest revenge isn't cruelty or control. It's living well despite everything they said you couldn't do. It's proving them wrong by building something beautiful from the pain they gave you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what he wanted for me all along. He just didn't know how to say it without hurting me first. I've forgiven him. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserve peace. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Feminine Revenge has got more thrilling stories for you.